So now that we know we have these things called parametric constraints, how do we use them in our design? Well, that's completely up to you. You don't have to use them at all. And a lot of people find that they just get in the way of their design process. Sometimes there's a good balance to be used. And there are some cases where you absolutely should use them and you should go full out. Where you really want to use them is in your dynamic blocks. Let's go with a blank file here. We're going to start with the AutoCAD.dwt. I'm going to turn off my grid and I'm going to open up my tool palettes. And I'm going to go to my wide flange beam imperial from the structural tab. Select it and insert it, and I can close this. Now this is a dynamic block that has all these different wide flange shapes in it. There are many of them. If I edit this block, you can see here that I have dimensional constraints. I have all of those set up. If I show you all of my constraints, you'll see that this line work is fully constrained. It's locked in. But with these different constraints that I have, the dimensional constraints and the geometric constraints, I can create a block table that will change each of these different dimensions to whatever value I preset. And I can have one set of line work, just one basic shape, and then I can control all of its dimensions through my block. And I can only do that in this way because of parametric constraints. So that is a great application of geometric and dimensional constraints while fully constraining my object. Parametric constraints really shine in blocks because they can't be overused. So a block has a very finite system. It's very small and very limited. Therefore, it's difficult to over-constrain the line work. However, you can over-constrain your model, making it very difficult to work with. But don't worry, if you do, AutoCAD will tell you that you've over-constrained your objects and will say, hey, look, you can't do that. So if we go back to drawing a rectangle again, you can draw any way you want. And my inferred constraints were on, so I drew that there. I'm going to turn those off so I don't do that again, but that's okay. This thing is fully constrained. Now we can see I have this perpendicular here. So this is locked in at 90 degrees. This line and this line are locked into being parallel to each other. The same with these two lines. So since this is locked into 90 degrees and the opposite lines are locked into being parallel, all I can do is just change their lengths. Can't change any of these angles or anything. Let's say I felt that I needed to further constrain this. I'm going to try to do a perpendicular constraint over on this corner here. AutoCAD tells me that this can't be applied. It can't do it. It conflicts with an existing constraint or would over-constrain the geometry. So I just click OK and I try again. Again, the same instance is happening. The reason is these corners here from these lines are all locked in as being perpendicular, even though that constraint isn't. But because they're fully constrained, they're locked in. The geometry is locked that way, and AutoCAD won't let you do that. AutoCAD, though, will always leave at least one value that can be changed. And in this case, it's the length of these lines. It will not apply constraints that conflict with other constraints. Also, if you try to apply a perpendicular constraint, in this case, where there already is one, like here, it won't let me do that. It'll tell you that it already exists. So it's very friendly that way. Now, you probably noticed that when you pick one of these or just hover over one of these constraints, it highlights the object it's constraining and any other objects that it's constraining and the constraints that it is with. So in this case, this is locked in as being parallel. In this case here, it's perpendicular. So you can see the two lines, they get very bright, this line and this line. And when I hover over something, you see that little glyph in the top right corner of my crosshairs? That's telling me that this object is constrained. So there are a lot of visual input in working with constraints in the design process. Now you can hide these constraints if you want. If you just hover over one and click on the little X, it'll hide it. It doesn't delete it. And when you select the line or the object, it'll show back up again, then go away. You can also hide them all just by clicking this button, or show them all, or show hide and select the ones that you want. So I'm selecting these two objects. I'm going to hide the constraints that have to do with those specific objects. Because a lot of times it can be very difficult to see your line work once you get all these constraints on there. So if I select a constraint and right click, I can hide it. I can hide all of them, or I can get to the constraint bar setting. And that's right here. This will be where you can control the infer geometric constraints options. So it works a lot like your O-snaps. I can turn some of these off. Like I don't want to apply anything that's perpendicular or nothing that's horizontal. You can do that, or you can turn them all on. I suggest you turn them all on because it will do a better job of fully constraining your objects as you create them. So with this turned on and I start drawing lines, I'm just going to draw a horizontal line. That's 100 units. I'm going to assume my units are feet. And see, I drew that line and it says it's horizontal. Say I offset it 12 feet either way. And then I offset another one 18 feet. Now I'm going to draw a line. I'm going to start it right here, go perpendicular to that. You can see how, as I do this, my lines are automatically constraining. But you can also see how these constraints aren't being applied. If I do a fillet, some of them aren't being constrained. They're not doing what it is that I want it to. But if I hit the auto constrain, and now all of these items are locked in to each other. So I just did a real quick layout of a road with some parking spots here. So the infer constraints and the auto constraints, when you're working with your designs, are two very different things, but they can help you lock in your geometry as you work. So it's important to do that. And it helps you when you're controlling what you need and when you are working on what it is you're working on.